Cryptography concepts are an important piece of information for any security professional, also important for the Security Plus exam. So that's why we're going to cover that coming up next.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Greetings and welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV. We are talking about cryptography, the dark arts, the black box, as it were, of how we keep things safe and secure. We use it all the time, just about every day if you're using these things at any given moment of your time. So understanding that's going to be really helpful to us. Wes, you're really going to push us into some of these basic conceptual ideas around cryptography, help us not only pass the exam, but have a good, well-rounded information or knowledge base when it comes to cryptography, right?
Definitely, Dan. In fact, we're going to go, much more in depth on some of the concepts that we're going to mention here. So don't think that this is by any means all to cryptography, but there's also a couple of topics here that I was telling Dan. I was like, well, I didn't want to do like a 2-minute episode on this one concept. So you'll see here towards the end that we're going to put a couple of cryptography concepts in this episode as well, because they just really don't fit other places.
I like to think of them as bonus concepts.
That's it, bonus concepts. That's right. So you're going to see that we'll talk about things like quantum computing. We'll talk about things like lightweight cryptography. And we're going to talk about things like blockchain coming up here too. So we're going to get started, if you will, with just the basic, what is cryptography? And cryptography really is the science. You could just make it easy. It's really nothing more than the science of keeping information secret, right? And we're going to learn how that's going to be applied, how it's going to happen in some upcoming episodes. Now, some of the reasons that we want to do this, Dan, right? Let's think about communications and data, right? These are information systems. In the old days, information systems really would just be something local to your computer. That is not the case anymore. There's just about anything that has a computing chip in it today also communicates with, well, what we know as networks and the internet. So we want to establish communications, right, between two peers. Now, these peers could be users trying to communicate. These could be some of your connectivity devices. I've got a couple of people here, just more like user icons, but I could switch these out. I could switch these out with a couple of routers that need to communicate. I could switch these out with servers that need to communicate. So really, it's just two peers, right? Two independent systems really within a network, and we're representing this with users because think about it here. If Dan and I want to communicate and we have some important information that we don't want somebody else to be able to be privy to, we want that information, that communication, if you will, to remain secret. So cryptography helps us to establish these communication sessions when really we want to just talk, but we don't want the outside world or people that aren't authorized to communicate with us during this conversation or be privy to that information. We want to keep it secret, or if you will, private and secure. So that's one of the major concepts behind cryptography, is that yes, we're keeping information secure, but remember, the information could be a form of a communication, it could be a form of data. It's really all inclusive.
So it's just basically trying to make us live in a world that is need to know, right?
That's
Anything that I need to know, I'll get that. If I don't, then I shouldn't see it. Even if it doesn't affect anyone, if I were privy to it, it's just not the world we want to live in. We want to make sure that every type of communication is secure, so that if someone were to stumble across it, they wouldn't get that sensitive.
That's right. Absolutely, Dan. So let's talk about authorized users and let's talk about communications, right? So we've got a two-way communication. I'm going to use Dan and I here as the examples, right? And maybe we've got some PII we're talking about. Maybe we've got some kind of, maybe we've got a corporate procedure that we're going through that we don't want the outside world to be aware of, right? Well, in that communication, we don't want other people, the unauthorized user. And it's not just it's not what you've learned about in other episodes that we've talked about. What have we talked about? Bad actors, right? Bad actors typically have this kind of malicious mindset that's going on, right? We're not just talking about bad actors. We're talking about somebody walking in the room and hearing your conversation, right? If I'm talking to, let's say, my financial advisor about how much money I have or don't have in the bank, depending on that perspective, I don't want, and now I'll use Dan as like maybe not the bad actor, but the person I don't want to be into that in that communication. So it doesn't matter if it is communications, and it also doesn't matter if it's data. The people that are unauthorized, and by the way, get used to this, this little person here, you're going to see that all the bad actors have hoodies and are well groomed, so you're going to see that largely throughout the, not only cryptography, but every other episode that we've talked about. We don't want them to have access to that communication. We don't want them to have access to information that maybe we're transferring over the wire. Now, notice that I've done like data transfer over the wire. That's what's known as data in transit. It's not the only place. If it's stored on a hard drive, it's data at rest. We don't want people to have access to that information too, so cryptography helps us there. Data in use as well. If I'm utilizing an application that's consuming or pulling in that information, that's data at use. We also want to keep that information, that communication, if you will, all basically irreversible to where somebody can't gain access to it. All right, so the next thing I want to talk a little bit about is what's known as some of the cryptography and security concepts. And one of the first ones that we'll talk about, and we're going to talk about it more, and you've probably heard us talk about confidentiality in the past. Confidentiality is what we've talked about with those authorized users, right? We want to make sure the authorized user is the only one that have access to the information and the communications. And the way that we do that with cryptography is through something known as encryption. Now, we're going to go more in depth into encryption in some episodes coming up. We're just kind of just putting our toe in the water right now, per se. We'll go ahead and we'll show you a little bit more about the deep end coming up.
Wes, would you go? I could see somebody getting easily confused by this because we're using the term cryptography, and basically it seems to be synonymous with encryption. Is that true, or is encryption like a subset of cryptography?
It's a subset, right? It's one of the things that we have. So if you talk about encryption being the science of hiding data, stenography is not encryption, but it does hide data as well, which again is another thing that we can talk about too coming up, and we will. I would say it's one of the components within cryptography.
So it's like we take cryptography as the conceptual idea. Encryption is a way we apply it.
It's one of the ways that we can apply that. Absolutely. Other things that we need to talk about are integrity, and cryptography also helps us with that too. Now, and that's handled through something known as hashing. We'll talk about hashing and message digest and what is that actual process? But for now, just know that we're going to apply something like a hashing technique, so that makes sure that that information, let's say it is a file that I'm transferring to Dan, that information stays in the form that it was, or the state that it was when it left my computer, or maybe in a voice over IP communication, and Dan knows that not a single jot, not a single punctuation mark has been changed. The information that he receives is in the state it was when it left my computer, and it hasn't been altered in any way.
No monkey business.
That's right. Nothing behind the scenes, no sleight of hand. That's right. Other things we have to worry about are availability, and this is more of a security concept than it is a cryptography concept. And the reason I say that is availability is making sure that the authorized users have access to the data that they need access to. I put it in here because you'll hear us talk about through all of Security Plus, that CIA triad, which is just really the pillars, principles of security. Availability says, if confidentiality says only authorized users have access to it, we do that through encryption. Integrity is making sure that the data doesn't change, and we're using hashing algorithms in order to perform that. Availability says that the authorized users that need access to that data have access to that data. Now, we do that with things like redundancy and fault tolerance, and we're going to talk about that coming up in a later section. We'll talk about what's known as operational resiliency. Big fancy word that says, hey, if something breaks, I want something else to take its place so that we don't lose downtime, and our users, in this case, in this context, still have access to their information. Now, there are a couple other concepts that I want you to be aware of, or one other concept that I want you to be aware of, and that's something known as non-repudiation. Non-repudiation, a lot of times we take a digital signature, which again is something we'll go more in depth on. Just think about it as an electronic means with an electronic piece of code or cryptography, if you will, that we can apply a signature, an electronic signature to a piece of information and send it over to the endpoint. And that endpoint not only can verify that the information through these algorithms has maintained its integrity, but also they know that when they receive that information, that is the information came from the person they expected to. And more importantly, the person that's sending the information can't later say, I don't know where you got that. That wasn't me. No, we could say, look, here, your digital signature, this little thing that only you can provide is on that data. It had to be you that sent it. So know that non-repudiation is one of those security concepts that you have to be aware of too. You'll see as we talk later in this section, we'll talk about something known as IPsec, even though I didn't put it in this list. Internet Protocol Security, a suite of algorithms and tools, if you will, utilities that we have that will allow us to perform encrypted communications, is another way that we can say, hey, it had to be you that established this communication before you even sent me the data. So now that I have that data, it had to be you that sent it. So that's non-repudiation. It's one of those concepts that I would be aware of, when you start talking about cryptography in general.
Yeah, I always just make sure that in my mind, I'm always tying non-repudiation with integrity, almost a synonymous type of term and an idea that it's verifying the integrity of that thing, and that you can't back out of it once you're in, right? All right, let's move into these bonus concepts.
All right, we got a couple.
I'm gonna wait because you're right. You got a couple of them. Lightweight cryptography is where we're gonna start now. I was under the impression this was just half the calories of regular cryptography. Apparently that was wrong.
Unfortunately, it's not the light beer of cryptography.
Yes. You're here to help us out with that. So exactly what do we mean when we say a lightweight cryptography?
Sure. Now, I will tell you, they put these, they put this term lightweight cryptography inside of the newer objectives, and we've actually had this for a while now, but they're kind of using it in an interesting way. So I want to tell you a little bit about what lightweight cryptography is for to begin with, right? It's used for devices that traditionally have low power and what they call constrained devices, devices that don't have a lot of processing power. Now, saying that, any of you that has bought, we're here in 2020, towards the end of 2020, any of you that have bought a cell phone or a smartphone within the last 5-6 years knows that those things have more power in them than some people's computers do. So I use that term relatively, and the reason I say that, you're going to learn later on as far as an encryption algorithm that we talk about called ECC, elliptic curve cryptography. That is not really what we're talking about here, but that is the practical application of a lightweight cryptography. And what it means is through that algorithm, we can produce very strong encryption that doesn't take a lot of processing power in order to perform it and reverse it. All right. Now, back in the earlier days, Dan and I were kind of joking around about this. We had these SCADA systems, SCADA, however you'd like to say that, things like the industrial control systems, and they were largely proprietary, right? They were air-gapped. You didn't have access to them. Even in some remote telemetry units, maybe you might have access to those, but even those are going to be heavily, quarantined. But then the problem came is that these very low power devices that were really, really siloed, we attached them to TCP/IP based networks, right? And that's where the problem lies, right? We didn't really need that internal encryption if the device can't be connected to unless you have a lock and key and a serial cable that connects directly to the interface, right? I have to physically be in your location. And one of the 10 immutable laws of security that Microsoft had put out a long time ago says if I can touch the location that you're at, or touch your server or that device, it's no longer yours, right? If I have physical access, you shouldn't worry about cryptography. At that point, well, I can't say that. Let me be careful because we have data at rest. So even if I can get your device, you should still be encrypting it. But in those days, if I had physical access to the device, you had to worry about security in a lot of other areas first.
Yeah, because at the very least, the device is no longer secure.
Right.
The hardware of it at that point, because I can touch it.
That's right. And if you've ever, I've seen some proof of concept over here that this guy's done, with things that you could directly plug into like ports on devices.
It's fun.
And if you have access to that, right, you need to rethink some of your security parameters. So it's really for these constrained devices. The other thing, too, is there's a lot of hybridized environments today, IoT. All right, IoT devices, if you've ever seen things like Raspberry Pis, smart TVs, if you will, Dan, you and I were joking, the coffee pot, the refrigerator, You know, unfortunately, your kid's doll.
Yeah,
you know,
my washing machine.
your washing
Yeah,
machine,
you
right?
name it. Everything's connected nowadays.
And think about it; these things don't have like Xeon processors and i7 processors in them, but
maybe
now
yours doesn't.
Oh, yours doesn't. He's like, ooh. So with these devices now connected to the, connected to routable networks, we need to have some kind of way that the device itself can perform some encryption. The practical application of that is going to be, like on smartphones, really is going to be things like elliptical curve cryptography, which we'll talk about coming up in another episode. But there are some ciphers that I want you to be aware of. We're going to explain a little bit more on what ciphers are. So this is really here is just a vocab dump, and I want you to be aware of two different protocols that are used on these low-powered devices. There are more out there. There's plenty of them out there. But these are two that I want you to be aware of for the exam. One that's called present and one that's called twine. These are two of these algorithms, and I really could put ECC here, but ECC is used all over the place. It's not just used in lightweight cryptography. We add a lot of other stuff to that. So that's one of the reasons that I didn't put it here. So Dan, that's a little bit about lightweight cryptography. It isn't half the calories. I don't know if it's less filling, but it certainly gets the job done.
All right. Well, let's put on our schoolboy hat, our PhD ideas here. Let's move into the quantum realm.
All right.
As quantum computing is becoming a thing. I would think that the quantum cryptography is not far behind that.
That's true. See, again, this is another one of those things that they want Security Plus students, right? Because if you think about it, Security Plus is a foundational security course, right? And they want you to be aware of some of these things, and that's quantum, right? So there's two different things that they call out. I put them all here the same thing. They call out quantum communications and quantum computing. Dan mentioned the quantum computing, right? We have these massive computers that can perform these massive calculations, but I want you to know, at this point, what we're talking about is more theoretical. And you're going to say, well, wait, Wes. Harvard, MIT, Stanford, they're all working on quantum computers. Yes, they are, but they're all in the theoretical realm at this point. I'm not saying that the NSA doesn't already have one already using that, but that is a state, a government, and maybe even governments across the world. You're not gaining access to that right now.
Well,
So,
in their defense, they have, alien technology.
well, that's true. We know that's where CDs came from, of course, the Men in Black, right?
That's right. So I saw the movie.
Yeah,
right
that's
there.
right. So just understand that it's, it's currently theoretical. And all joking aside, what they want you to be aware of is that when this does become a thing, that Dan and I, you as the learner and I, can go out and actually afford, well, then we have to worry about it, right? We definitely have to be more aware of it. But at this point, it's a theoretical. There are encryption concerns. There really are. Right now, one of the strongest encryption ciphers that you're going to learn about when we get into some later episodes here in cryptography is what's known as the Advanced Encryption Standard. In fact, in AES 256 right now is the Department of Defense's standardization for top secret class or top secret documents, right? And it's considered feasibly, it's not feasible right now to be able to crack it. When something like this comes out, there's a potential to have it cracked within a day. Right? Not 10,000 years, not 100,000 years, in a day. So we do have those concerns, but it's not one of these, let's put a tinfoil hat on, right? It's just something that you should know for the exam. And there's also what's known as post-quantum. And post-quantum is something that is really nothing more than saying, hey, whatever algorithm, whatever cryptography we have, it's resilient to quantum computing. That's all I really want you to worry about for the exam. Know they're theoretical, know what they are, but it's not something that we're actually realizing in a more standardized mass, availability.
All right. Well, there you go. Quantum computing, not quantum cryptography.
Sure.
We're talking cryptography and computing, but it's a theoretical thing that we just need to be aware of for the exam. Why don't you round us out with some blockchain? It's a hot topic, right? We see it all the time.
That's right.
It's being used in all sorts of different interesting ways. So what do we need to know about that?
Sure. So let's, we look at blockchain. Blockchain is basically a distributed public ledger is what it comes down to, right? It is something that's completely decentralized. It's not owned by a single bank. It's not like something like, for instance, I have to go to Bank of America, but Wells Fargo doesn't have it. I'm just using names out here. But think of it as a public ledger. It's public record keeping, all right, that can be verified. And how they do that is through something known as a block. A block really is a set of information. It's a transactional information that is stored in blocks. The great thing about this is that the transaction information can be publicly verified, because what happens is this is sent to, these transactions is verified by this peer-to-peer network of computers. And the blocks also have timestamps on them. Now, once it is verified, then what happens is a hashing algorithm is applied to it that can be then verified by other computers in the future. Those blocks, if you will, with that hashing algorithm are then added to additional blocks, right? Every transaction can be verified, and every time a block is added, it starts to form what's known as the blockchain. Now, let's say Dan has a blockchain, everything's valid, there's nothing wrong with it. I decide somehow I want to modify the first puzzle piece, the first block in this chain. All right, well, I can do that. That's fine, no problem. But that will ruin the mathematical value of the operation that you're going to learn is hashing. It will basically modify that value, and then when that network of peer-to-peer computers goes to verify it, it says, well, wait a second, everybody else is telling me when they verified it, it looked like this, and now you're handing it off to me, and I'm trying to verify it, and there's a mismatch. There's a disparity between what they're telling me and what you're telling me, and that's considered an invalid transaction. So it's a very good way. We see this a lot, right? We see this in things like cryptocurrencies, right? Bitcoin uses this, and there's a lot of other places, but it's a very good way to publicly verify transactions in which the data that's stored in it cannot be reversed and can then be verified as the chain builds. So that's a little bit about blockchain. And again, you don't have to be able to implement one of these, but I would be able to summarize them should you see them on the exam.
All right, great stuff, Wes. Do thank you for your time. And we covered some really interesting conversation today, looking at key cryptography concepts, why we're using it, what are the basics of that, and then our bonus stuff, that lightweight cryptography, as well as blockchain and quantum. Really cool stuff there. That being said, we've got more to come in our Security Plus series, but as for this episode, it's time to call it a day. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.